All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you as you are coming in from the waiting room for joining us today for our Bloom Business Series webinar. Our presenters today will be sharing the basics of finding and leasing a commercial space, and we are very excited to jump into this topic with you today. So today's event and all of this series is made possible by our presenting sponsor, PNC. And with us today is Fred Landis, AVP, Organizational Financial Wellness and Financial Wellness Consultant with PNC. And he's going to give us a few remarks to kick us off today. Thank you, Fred. Good morning.
Thank you, Katie. Good morning, and good morning, everyone. Happy to be here this morning and looking forward to our panel discussion on commercial real estate. As Katie indicated, I'm with Organizational Financial Wellness within PNC, which is a line of business that specializes in solutions for employee wellness at organizations. We at PNC are very excited about supporting this series and are really looking forward to the information that's going to be shared this morning. So rather than ramble on, I'll thank you very much again for attending and turn it back to Katie.
Well, thank you, Fred. Short and sweet this morning. We like it.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. And we're so grateful for this partnership with PNC that makes these resources available to the merchants in downtown York. And also by doing it virtually, makes this kind of information accessible to small business owners all across York County and beyond. So we have a really dynamic panel today. So I'm going to jump into giving some introductions. We have Ben Chiaro, Travis Kepler, and Blanda Nace. So Ben Chiaro, his commercial real estate expertise is focused on urban redevelopment and adaptive reuse projects, retail and restaurant leasing and tenant representation, investment sales, and shopping center leasing. In addition to 17 years of experience in the industry and a BA in business from Millersville, Ben has been very involved in the community as a volunteer and has been a huge friend and supporter and partner with Downtown Inc. So thank you, Ben, for being here today. Second on our panel, we have Travis Kepler. Travis has been practicing architecture for more than 22 years, building expertise in projects for schools, museums, retail environments, assisted living, religious facilities, it's quite a long list, medical practices and beyond. And this encompasses a variety of construction types and schedules, as one can imagine. So Travis really thrives on challenging projects, which we love to hear. And that includes a lot of adaptive reuse work and integration of new systems within a building's historic fabric. And as we know, we have a lot of phenomenal historic projects in certainly downtown York and York County and beyond. And then third on our panel, we have Blanda Nace, who leads the Economic Development Bureau within DCED or DECD at the City of York. Prior to joining the city in 2019, I had the good fortune to work with Blanda at the YCEA, and he led several major projects throughout York County and has his fingerprint on a variety of things that we see and enjoy every single day. So Blanda assists businesses with locations, financing, and business-related concerns. And over his lifetime has helped dozens of small businesses, probably hundreds, including 4 of his own, where he was involved with lease negotiations. So I want to thank all of you for joining us this morning. As hopefully everybody can tell, this is a very well-rounded expert panel, and we have a whole bunch of questions that we are going to kind of just jump right into. So if any of our attendees have questions for today, please put them into the Q&A box. We'll make sure that we get to them at the end. We do have some to kick us off and some that were also submitted. So I'm going to jump right in with a couple of questions. So let's be clear about some common terms. You hear buzzwords, they start to get fuzzy in everyone's mind. You might think you know what it means, you might not know what it means. So the difference between a realtor and a real estate broker, and same thing, kind of the role of a property manager versus property owner, the difference between renting and leasing. We hear a lot of confusion about that, and some things that are probably really beneficial to kind of maybe get us cleared up. Ben, do you want to maybe start us off on clearing up some of those common terms?
Sure. Thanks, Katie. I think I'll answer the really simple one first. Renting and leasing are basically the same thing. Renting is a term that's more commonly used in the residential market, renting an apartment, versus leasing in the commercial arena is the more common term. But it's one and the same. Renting a space, leasing the space is it's recognized as a form of temporary ownership in the state of Pennsylvania, leasehold interest, and it's for a period of time. There's no transfer of title typically, and there's a set term and set amount of rent, but they're really one and the same. Where it gets a little sketchier is defining realtor versus real estate broker. There are industry terms that we use commonly, and then there are the legal side of the terminology, which is what the state licensing recognizes, where at the state level, a real estate broker is a type of license. That's the person that typically manages and oversees an office, and all of the practicing realtors are under that broker's license. So that, the realtor is the salesperson's license. The broker is that master broker that oversees the office license. Once we get into the industry, though, we're all practicing brokerage work. And so brokering deals, functioning as a broker of real estate is thrown around as just kind of what we all do. But in technical terms, the broker is really the individual that holds the broker's license from the state level that oversees the office. Then diving into, property manager versus realtor broker versus property owner, that's a real mixed bag. Each of those roles can do multiple functions. Some property owners handle all of it themselves. They lease their space, they manage their space, they interact with their tenants, collect the rents, perform maintenance, etc. And many of them like to hire out and create a buffer or have a broader reach. So they'll hire us to do the brokerage work, to go out and market the space and solicit tenants and vet them out and structure the leases and handle the negotiations and kind of coach them through the process. And a property manager would then step in and really interact with us on the brokerage side, kind of from the beginning, to make sure the lease is properly structured and we're addressing any kind of building-wide concerns and how the owner prefers to collect rent and how expenses are handled and maintenance things get handled. And then, once the lease is executed and a tenant takes possession, the property manager is really going to be the one that facilitates everything from that point on, with rental collections and expense reimbursements and handling any maintenance requests and things like that.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. Very helpful too, I think, clearing up a couple of those things as we jump into the rest of the discussion and the conversation, so that everybody's kind of on the same page. And a lot of those buzzwords just kind of get thrown around, and until you're living it every day, like the three of you are, I'm sure it's very hard to navigate that. So, there's no argument that the real estate market has been on a wild ride for the past 24 months, both in commercial and certainly in even for just your average homeowner. So looking at kind of the current state of the real estate in the York area, what does it mean for a business right now that's seeking retail or small office spaces? Are things up in the air? Is it leveling out? Is it as competitive as it was? Or does it seem like it's kind of coming back down? And I'll open that question to anyone on the panel that would like to start us off.
I think, and Ben and I were just talking about this in a meeting the other day. We're seeing a lack of spaces, really, which is actually a great sign. York is full, which is fabulous. And it's just tough. We're talking about reaching out to owners who have vacant storefronts to see what we can do to open them up to the market, to create some more availability. And looking forward, beyond probably next year, the city's actually going to start, we're looking at redoing our zoning to allow more retail to be out in the neighborhoods more. Back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, that zoning was changed. So you see a lot of what were historically storefronts with curtains and plants in the front window because they're not legally allowed zoned to be stores anymore. So we're going to expand that out and allow to create more retail and consumer interaction to happen out into the neighborhoods a little bit more, kind of expand the footprint of the retail district.
That's really exciting to hear. As you said, downtown has really gotten very full, which is awesome and wonderful. But what you can't do is make more land. So when you start looking around and everybody wants to be part of that revitalization of downtown, that's great. And you don't want to turn them away. So it's really nice to hear that the city is really kind of planning ahead and being so proactive about how to address that. Did you have something to add, Ben?
Yeah, I think I would say, retail space has been extremely active in the city. Coming out of the pandemic, we saw really a rapid lease up of almost every available storefront space that we had within the central business district. And almost all of them at or above pre-COVID rents. So we saw, a huge wave of startup businesses or people kind of pivoting, shifting gears, doing new things that wanted to co-locate in downtown York, take advantage of the growing foot traffic and number of residents and, the businesses that exist in downtown York. What still exists today are predominantly either restaurant opportunities that are of a larger size and scale, and are impacted by the ever-changing market for liquor licenses, which have proven to be a pretty specific requirement for the success of a lot of the larger scale restaurant operators in the downtown. The forced competition between grocery stores and convenience stores for the same license that an independent restaurant would operate under has really, created some disparity in what a restaurant can pay versus what those larger corporate entities are willing to pay. So that's created some challenges. We've seen a tremendous amount of brewery activity in the downtown that continues to grow. We've got 3 active breweries looking right now in the city. So I don't see a slowdown there. I think that's become kind of the answer to the liquor license pricing challenge. I'd say the office market is starting to really kind of shake loose. And I think a lot of employers are making some more permanent decisions on what today's office space should look like in the hybrid workforce model. So we're seeing some scaling down, people are, maybe reducing their footprint, but wanting to stay downtown, seeing opportunities to take better and newer spaces. And then, a lot of rearranging the furniture. It's a term that Blanda and I like to use a lot in conversations where we're trying to cherry pick, for example, office users that may have occupied 3 or 4 consecutive row buildings with limited parking, multiple floors, really older structures, chopped up, where those might have an opportunity to be converted back into residential projects. Those occupants are being moved into the Class A office spaces that really aren't candidates for conversion opportunity. And that's kind of double dipping. That's allowing us to fill a vacancy and reduce the amount of supply in general of the downtown office market. So it's kind of a double hit against vacancy rates. Anything else to add, Blanda or Travis?
No, I think it's interesting. We're still trying to figure out like you said, the office, the post-pandemic hybrid work model. It's really been interesting because for the longest time we've had, this big, really nice big spaces, but now we're starting to see them starting to get filled up, consolidated, combined, which is important to our retailers because we thrive on that business lunch traffic or that after work shopping traffic that comes downtown. So it's still important to us to attract those offices and attract those workers. Even though we all love working from home, our retailers it doesn't help them much at all.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of companies, downsize in a footprint standpoint because they learned in the pandemic that they could work, in a partial or full remote, workplace. I mean, we downsized into a smaller space, and we've done a lot of work with Ben and his group recently, test fitting for clients to see can we move into some of these vacant spaces, and just seeing how that we can utilize remote work to shrink footprints, and be creative with, desking options, layout options, things like that.
All excellent points. It kind of leads into another question we have here too. We're just talking about, foot traffic and proximity and how you can really capture the people that are downtown or are around you. So for the businesses that are trying to select a brick and mortar location, everybody has the different things that they find important, whether it's street appeal, foot traffic, parking, the cheapest rent. How do you, what's kind of your advice on what they should be prioritizing or what they should really be looking for when they're saying, I want a brick and mortar location? What are those most important factors for consideration?
Well, I'll jump in here. I mean, I think that really needs to be determined in the business plan phase. What is important to making their business successful? Do they rely on impulsive foot traffic that is walking by a storefront and might venture in simply because they see something that catches their eye? Are they a daily convenience driven use that needs to be in that highly visible, highly trafficked location that is convenient on people's typical daily traffic paths? Or are they someone that could really function as a destination use, and they don't need to be as prominent? They can maybe take a lesser expensive space with less visibility and less traffic because people are typically seeking them out through alternative sources, whether it's online or different types of advertising to find them. So I think the critical thing to do is to not just go out and start looking at spaces day one, but to actually develop that business plan strategy first, so that you can be a little bit more refined in the approach to the space search.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great point. Anything to add, Blanda or Travis?
Yeah, I always say, think of it from your customer's point. Pretend you are your customer, and what are you selling, and how would you interact with it? For example, if you're selling, I don't know, something heavy or something big, do you need to be closer to parking because your customers are then going to have to carry something, a huge bouquet of flowers out 4 blocks to get to their car? Think about things like that. And the interaction, and what would you do, or what would you do as your own customer? What's critical to you? And usually a retailer, you should know who your customer base is and how they're going to want to see your space.
Excellent point. Yeah, putting yourself kind of in those shoes as that customer experience, that really does go a long way. And Ben, you kind of mentioned a little bit about this, sort of those first steps. So, certainly putting together a business plan, a business model, knowing what your vision is for that. But do any of the three of you have anyone that comes to you as a small business owner and says, great, I'm ready to move into my new storefront. Here's what I'm really excited for. Here's what I'm looking for. How do you kind of direct them as to where to start? Or, hey, that's really exciting and awesome and great. Let's ask a couple of clarifying questions. Let's get a few ducks in a row. So how do you kind of navigate figuring out where to start and how to guide other small businesses on that?
I can start. There's usually a couple of upfront questions that we like to ask, and it becomes very apparent whether somebody's ready to start touring spaces or not. If they haven't figured out what the square footage requirement for their use is, or haven't developed a loose budget, or decided, what other amenities are required in the space to allow them to function properly. They likely have not yet developed a business plan. And so we will, one of the first recommendations is Susquehanna SCORE, which is an acronym for Service Corps of Retired Executives. It's typically a free service that provides counseling on how to develop a business plan, reviewing the business plan, asking some tough questions that they may not be asking themselves, talking about where the funding is going to come from, et cetera. And it's a great process to get people to really think deep about the business, so that when they do come back to the table for the space search, they're really prepared and they know what they should be looking for.
I think one of the first things I had learned in economic development, and actually Ben helped teach me this, is sometimes you just have to say to a new entrepreneur that, hey, maybe you're not ready. And that's probably the best thing that they could hear, because they have a really unique niche product that they think is going to sell like hotcakes. Then, maybe you shouldn't be selling that at this location, or maybe you should expand your product, or just look at what you're doing. Because everybody has a dream, but sometimes they need an outsider's perspective to help them, enhance that a little bit. The worst thing we want to see is to place an entrepreneur somewhere and have them fail immediately. And, we want people to be successful.
Yeah, and I think to touch on what Ben said about understanding what you need, understand not only your square footage requirements, which obviously are very important, what type of use you're going to be, that has implications in codes, and what your program is. And what I mean by that is, what do you need in the space? Are you primarily an office type of environment where you've got desking, you've got, you know, people basically working with their heads down? Is it more collaborative spaces that you need? Do you need any prototyping space? Things like that. Understand the different pieces that need to go in the space, because then a lot of times what happens is, you know, like Blanda just said, you know, you get locked into a space, then they'll come to us and we start to ask these questions about what do you need, what's your program, and a lot of times we find out that they don't always match up right. And then that gets tricky to kind of, you're essentially shoehorning someone into a space that may not be the right fit. Whereas if they take a step back in the beginning, when they're touring spaces or getting ready to, it'll help that process move down the line much faster, and more efficiently from getting what they need out of the space.
Excellent. Thank you all. Three excellent points. We work closely with Susquehanna Score as well, and they truly are such a resource for any small businesses at any point in their juncture. And I'm sure too, with, you know, Blanda, to your point, with the past 2 years and the online sales too, something that maybe would have really thrived in a brick and mortar, maybe you don't need as large of a space, or you need more warehousing and less of a storefront space. So I'm sure a lot of factors that even in the past 2 years have really kind of jumbled the approach to a lot of these avenues.
Katie, if I can just kind of add,
Yeah.
Not going to be relevant in all circumstances, but, you know, for a more sophisticated business that really does understand who their customer is, and can kind of drill down, you know, technology has really advanced what we can do in real estate site selection. So, you know, we're doing a lot of what we call utilizing mobility data today. So, you know, everyone's got a cell phone, and, you know, when you're on your cell phone, you walk into the bank, for example, or the grocery store, you've got apps that are constantly refreshing in the background, and they're sending pings to satellites. And so they're dropping a data point when you're there. And basically, without associating it directly with you as an individual, all those data points get aggregated by data collection companies, and then they're made available to purchase. And so we purchase them. And when we're working with maybe multi-unit operators, you know, banking, restaurants, retail, we're actually able to aggregate that data and map it and show how customers' patterns would actually impact locations of their business, and say, well, I'll use a banking client that we work with as an example, where, you know, they're convenience driven. They want to be on people's path to work or on people's path to the grocery store, or specific things that it makes it easy for them to just make that stop. And so we will analyze the trade areas of other banks, where their data points are coming from, what their common daytime location, common evening location are. And then, you know, we'll compare that to the closest surrounding grocery stores and pharmacies, and start to put together a trade area based on how the people travel in that market. You know, what's their typical radius and drive time, and, you know, where are they frequenting? And we can really build a trade area from mapping and those data points from cell phones. And again, it's not going to be relevant for every type of business and every type of market, but it is just fascinating what technology has allowed us to do in real estate site selection in today's world.
That's very fascinating. I love anything, especially coming from the marketing side, that is data driven, because for so long it was like darts in the dark. You didn't know what you were doing. So now to be able to have that kind of relevant data and be able to make really informed decisions, I just personally find that really fascinating and compelling. And I think makes it a lot stronger for, you know, if you're gonna take this leap, and you know, as Blanda said, for a lot of people, this is their dream, this is their passion. You want to do it with the support and the knowledge that you're making a really well-informed decision. So it's great that technology has kind of advanced so that business owners making these commitments are doing so being very well-informed, and using resources like the three of you here to help guide that process too. So we've talked kind of a lot about, you know, identifying a space, what to look for, questions to ask, kind of where in the process. And I know we have a question in the chat about leasing. So kind of want to switch the focus a little bit and talk about kind of the times in the business model to reach out to a realtor, to a lender, some of the financing that's available, some of the maybe the more creative options than just a traditional source. We know business owners are a very passionate, gritty, do it on their own industry, which is incredible. But there are resources out there. There's financial resources, real estate resources to help kind of navigate this. And we've certainly talked about some of the business planning. But for each of you, is there kind of the best time for someone to reach out to a realtor or a lender? Is it ever too early in the process? Is it, too late in the process? What do you think is kind of that sweet spot that they should start forming these relationships?
I think the sooner the better. Even when you're at your business planning stage to establish relationships with lenders or with a real estate advisor of some sort, because they can help guide you in the right direction. If you get too far along in your own planning and your own thought process, you may, as Travis said, you end up shoehorning yourself in, or you try to figure something out. But if you start with your trusted advisors from the very beginning and kind of build your team, they can help you develop that along the way.
Yeah, I think I'd add that, it's never too early to reach out and at least establish those connections. Oftentimes, again, it may not, somebody calls me, it may not lead to, sending them sites and going and touring spaces. It might be directing them to, for example, reach out to YCEA to talk about, what type of grant programs are out there, what kind of funding sources are out there. Talking to the RDA about the Fresh Foods Fund, for example, for restaurants, and, understanding what that application and vetting process looks like, or Bloom grants, or, there's all sorts of different funding sources out there that if you just start asking the right people, you'll get directed towards them. And it's good to be able to factor them into your business plan early on, because, it all kind of factors into what we call a capital stack. And that's, you might have multiple sources of funding that line up to you get the project going, and understanding what the options are early on is really going to help you refine that correctly. I also think a design professional should be part of that mix. And Travis, you can add to this, but, again, just blindly looking at spaces and funding without understanding your space program, I think can just lead to a lot of wasted time. And it may not be relevant to somebody that's just going to open up a 500 square foot retail boutique and, put some shelves in and display product and make sales. But if there's any type of process that needs to be integrated into that, and Travis, if you want to jump in here, you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and then to throw another wrench into, when you get into larger development, you start to look at, funding sources that have requirements specific to construction, and how documents are managed, how they're submitted, how they're bid out. That can add time. It also can add, construction costs, and then you have to look at things like, Baraki, things like that, where you have a match that you have to bring to the table to match, the funds. So there's from that aspect, that's a lot larger development, and it's kind of a different path sometimes. But there's also that aspect. But yeah, I agree with what Ben and Blanda said. It's the earlier the better. It's never even just if you have an idea, it's always best to get in touch with people early on and start that process thinking early, because we try to do a lot of work up front here in our office to try to save time on the back end. And the more upfront work you can do, the better off you'll be.
Excellent. Thank you. And a great transition into a little bit more about the funding. Thank you, Ben, for sharing the YCA and Downtown Inc. We have a host of resources from financing, grants, loans. Love to talk with businesses about what their plans are moving forward and how we can support them, especially through the launch of the Bloom Business Empowerment Center. And then, of course, there's traditional conventional financing that comes from a bank. But I know there's some additional funding sources, especially working so closely with the city of York when it comes to securing or improving a physical space. So any of those funding sources that we would like to touch on, Blanda, I would kind of direct this to you if there's anything from the city in particular.
Yeah, our big thing is Kiva, KIVA.org. Kiva.org is a actual global crowd lending platform So it's a phenomenal program, and I participate in it quite a bit, where I, as an individual, can loan money to a borrower in as small as $25. So I probably have maybe close to a dozen loans that I've made to people nationwide, and they pay me back like I get like $1.32 a month back from some of these people. So it's kind of a hybrid model between, I feel like I'm investing because I'm helping someone get started or grow their business, but they're paying me back. So from the borrower's point of view, it is a 0% interest loan. I mean, it's still a loan, you still have to pay it back, but it is 0% interest. And the underwriting or the amount of review that they do is kind of scaled back. So they look at your credit score a little bit, but they're not going to dig into it a whole lot. So it's really a great platform. And depending on the length of time you've been in business, they're anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000 to $10,000 loans. Most of ours have been in the $1,500 to $3,000 range. And the city of York will match so the process, as you go online and you create a website on the Kiva platform and you get people to lend you money, the city of York will actually match people's loan amount that they lend you, and the city becomes a lender as well, which is really great. And we've got $50,000 in the bank ready to loan to people, which is just a phenomenal program.
That is a very unique program. Thank you for kind of explaining the ins and outs too. I think sometimes with programs, people get scared off by not knowing or not wanting to dive in. But that breakdown makes it pretty simple. So that's very helpful to know. And I think a really unique program to York too. So any other specific funding strategies or resources, Ben, Travis, and certainly still Blanda too. Travis, I don't know if there's anything either from the design element where when it does come down to you're having those conversations about outfitting a space, how that process is going to look, if there are any funding sources available for that type of a need.
I don't know the specific ones, but there are. We have some people in our office who do help with some of that, some of the looking for grants and things like that. But there are some grants out there for assisting with the design portion of the project. Blanda, I'm not sure if you know the exact ones.
They don't.
Put you guys on the spot with that one. Sorry.
Right, sorry about that one. Yeah, but there definitely is availability out there. And like I said, people can reach out to people that work with grants, or even us in some instances. Early on, clients will come to us and say, what opportunities do we have? And we have some people in our office that specialize with some of that, looking for that and looking for things for historic preservation, things like that. So it's definitely available.
I was going to add, like, understanding the size and scale of the project, and are you a tenant, are you an owner? I mean, there's historic tax credits, there's new market tax credits, there's the redevelopment capital assistance program through the state. Identifying is the property in a hub zone, is the property in a federal opportunity zone. So there's a multitude, and it's really going to be a lot more specific to the individual and the type of project and the structure of the real estate transaction, whether they're going to be applicable or not.
Excellent. Thank you all for pivoting on that one with me. So we know very important to work with the township, the borough, your partners in city administration, wherever you are. Obviously, we have a lot of downtown York business owners on today's call, but this could be relevant to certainly anyone, regardless of the municipality that you're in. Any tips on kind of the best ways to work with your municipality to be efficient and productive? Sometimes that can also be a hill to climb if you aren't 100% sure who to go to, who does what, who does permitting, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. So any tips from any of the three of you on how to kind of navigate that for the small business owner?
Yeah, I can usually start with this anyway. We at the city of York, we require all new businesses to register with us, and part of that process is, it opens the door up to all of our zoning reviews, our certificate of occupancy reviews, and it's a simple, literally, in fact, I looked yesterday, it's the average time to fill it out is 11 minutes for the new business startup package. And it's yorkcity.org. Under the business tab, it says start a business, and it takes you right to our complete web-based information where you just enter your name, address, business type, hours of operation, and it gets routed through about 9 different people who are all in part of a dashboard of everything new that comes in. Our zoning officer, our building codes official, everybody goes through step by step. Even food permitting and health inspections are all part of the process. So it's a vast improvement over years past in the city, that we've done a big improvement on this. One thing that is not connected is registering and filing with the York Adams Tax Bureau. And that's really critical because there's a local mercantile tax that you must pay, and you have to be registered with the York Adams Tax Bureau in order to do that. And we've kind of started to crack down on that. There have been a lot of businesses who haven't been registered as a business with the tax bureau. In fact, we made it now a requirement as any grant applications that are submitted. When we did some COVID small business grants, we required it, and the tax bureau got 32 new business applications in 1 week, some of which were businesses who have been in existence since the 80s because they were never registered before. So we're trying to get people legal and compliant, and our website and this new business startup really helps with that quite a bit.
Really fighting the good fight on that one, getting everybody legal,
Yeah.
Blanda.
I get it, but it's got to be legal.
Yeah, I think I'll add, going beyond just the city, I mean, there's 72 municipalities in York County, and each one, for the most part, has their own zoning office, their own, code book or zoning ordinance, and requirements associated with that. Many of them outsource to third parties to facilitate a lot of that. But, that back to, getting started, really understanding your use and how it is defined within a municipality, because that can differ from municipality to municipality, and then what the specific requirements to get code approval and zoning approval associated with your use are in the municipalities that you're entertaining opening in. It's a critical kind of early on step, because it can, a lot of time can get put into it only to find out that, all right, I've done, all of this business planning and, maybe some conceptual designs and, maybe even some negotiations. And then you realize, well, I'm not a permitted use in this zone, and the likelihood of getting a variance or a special exception or conditional use are pretty slim. So I would say that's one of the critical first steps that should be taken, is defining your use and figuring out, loosely what municipalities you're considering and how each of them views it.
Excellent, thank you. And sort of a little bit of a follow-up, a little bit different. And Travis, I'm going to direct this question to you. So what steps should an owner take to ensure code compliance when they're looking to redevelop a space? And in addition, kind of what are the other things that they need to be thinking about as well in that?
So one of the things Ben just mentioned was understanding your use is obviously the first step when it comes to the code side of it. Looking at, is it an existing building that you're looking at renovating, or is it a new build? So if it's an existing building, there's different levels of renovation, 1, 2, and 3. So 1 being just finishes, minor things like carpet, paint, upgrades, things like that. Level 3 being full on, over 50% of the building is being modified. Inside of that also is if it's an existing building that had an existing use, if you're changing the use type, that triggers different things from, let's say it's a building that's been built 50 years ago. It may have been grandfathered in, on certain things like accessibility, means of egress, things like that. When you trigger a change of use, you have to bring those things up to compliance. And I don't want to dig too deep, because this gets really deep and really boring really quick from a code standpoint. But some of the bigger things we always look at with our clients right out of the gate is, like I said, the use, what fire ratings may come with that. How do we handle accessibility? And that's a big one in these reuse of buildings, to get creative, to be able to accommodate, people with that need that accessible entrance. Emergency egress is always a big one, and I know that's a stance the city has taken, and rightfully so, is making sure you can get people out of the building safely. So all of these things kind of wrap into looking at an overall code review for the big 10,000 foot items right out of the gate. And one of the things we always do with the permitting office is we create a concept with a client, and then we go meet with the inspectors and just make sure we're all on the same page. That the code book is 1,000+ pages long, right? And it's in certain sections, it's very open to interpretation. One municipality may look at it one way, the other may look at it completely different. So we like to meet with those officials and say, listen, this is how we view the code. Do you agree? And if not, then let's figure it out and kind of meet in the middle to keep things moving.
Thank you, Travis. Blanda or Ben, anything additional to add to that? Okay, great. So we have a question in the chat and something we certainly wanted to talk about anyway, which are the structure of commercial leases and certainly the triple net leases, which are very common in New York. So again, whichever one of you think would be the best one to kind of tackle this. But could you tell us a little bit more about what the triple lease, really means, what they're commonly used for, and any other types of leases that you see a lot in the York area for small business owners?
Sure, I'll jump in on this one. So triple net leases are very common, actually, probably globally, certainly nationwide. And so there's really two ends of the spectrum. There's triple net, or even actually a little bit above that is absolute net. We won't go too far into the weeds on that. And then there's gross. And a gross lease means that you write a rent check each month to the landlord, and that covers everything. That's all the expenses, your utilities, your maintenance, your taxes, real estate taxes, fire and casualty insurance, exterior maintenance, interior maintenance, everything. If there's parking fees, it's all inclusive. Triple net or absolute net is the complete polar opposite of that, where your rent check covers nothing but rent, and your utilities that can be separately metered are separately metered in your name. Those that cannot are typically reimbursed through a common area maintenance charge or an operating expense reimbursement. Your real estate taxes are paid on a pro rata share as a line item. Fire insurance is reimbursed to the landlord as a pro rata share. And then any common area maintenance is also reimbursed as a pro rata share. And pro rata meaning if you're in a multi-tenant building, it's your square footage divided by the total square footage of the building is the percentage of each of those expenses that you would pay. And there's a common misconception that you're paying more for triple net. You're really not. If it's built into a gross lease, you're paying a higher lease rate to accommodate those expenses. If you're paying a triple net lease, you're typically paying a lower amount of rent and then pay those expenses on top. And the benefit to that is actually to a tenant that the landlord is not treating those pass-through expenses as a profit center. They're passing them on directly to the tenant in their actual amounts, and they get audited on an annual basis. They're completely transparent. And it actually allows a tenant to have a little bit better control of the expense structure and make sure that they're not overpaying. But a lot of tenants just don't like it, don't understand it. That the common question is, why am I paying the building owner's real estate taxes? I don't own the building. So we've actually found what we call a modified gross lease structure in downtown York is what seems to work the best, especially for smaller independent tenants, where you're going to pay the utilities basically, and you're going to maintain the inside of your space. But the landlord's going to cover the roof and structure and the snow removal and the taxes and insurance and any parking lot maintenance and exterior lighting and things like that. It really just allows the tenant to focus more on their business, work with a little bit more of a fixed budget where they don't get subjected to fluctuations in snow removal costs or rising taxes or things like that. So while it may not be the most beneficial or attractive to a landlord, a lot of the downtown landlords have adopted that modified growth structure just to create the path of least resistance to tenants.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to understand that from the very beginning, especially when you're comparing spaces. I had a property owner just a couple of weeks ago reach out to me. He said, "I've got this great space. I'm only charging $5 a square foot." I said, "Well, that's great. That's super cheap. It's wonderful." But he had like a $10 cam on top of it so you got to make sure when you're comparing two spaces or even looking at one space is that you completely understand what that landlord is including or not including. And like Ben said, there's all kinds of, when people say modified gross, it depends what's modified. Every single deal will be different, but you should really understand what you're going to be responsible for paying and what's included in your lease rate. And it is really a shocker. Most small businesses, the exact same thing, Ben. Why am I paying the taxes? I'm paying rent. It's really hard to stomach when you first think about what that includes. It's the reality of the situation.
I think just to add to that, it's also important to understand that every single word of a commercial lease is negotiable. There are no requirements set by any, authority or municipality or, licensing bureau. It's a direct agreement between a landlord and a tenant. They are the two parties to that agreement, and every single word of that agreement can be negotiated.
That's an excellent takeaway from today. If anybody remembers one thing, I think that's one of the top things that you've said, and especially with something that can be very intimidating, and maybe a sticking point for some business owners. So that's fantastic. So as we conclude, if anybody has any final questions, please drop them in the Q&A or the chat so we can address them. And as we're kind of wrapping up here, I'd like to ask each of the three of you. Let's see, we have one more question here. Let me pull that up. So the original question, which was in addition to leasing, can you talk about how to negotiate a lease in triple net in the situation I am looking at? Both seem flexible and need to be created. If anybody has anything to elaborate on that in particular.
I think I would just say that, that's something that just comes with experience. So having, engaging a professional, whether it's, a real estate broker, your attorney, most attorneys are completely competent in negotiating commercial leases. And if they don't, they typically have a colleague who has a lot of experience with it. But it's, that's again, back to every lease is unique to that landlord and that tenant. So there's no one document to refer to. Everything is negotiable. And if you've never done it before, I'd strongly suggest engaging a professional to assist with that. And again, I think maybe important to understand how, at least in the real estate world, we get paid, 9 times out of 10, there's a listing where a broker is signing an engagement to work on behalf of a property owner to market their space, solicit tenants. And there's a fee structure that's included that when that tenant is brought to the table and the lease is executed, the broker is going to get paid under that pre-negotiated fee structure. Typically, we offer what's called a co-broke fee, which is we're willing to split. If I have a listing on a property and another real estate broker or agent brings the tenant, I will split my fee with that other broker or agent who is representing the tenant. So as a tenant looking for space or trying to, negotiate a lease, having somebody represent your interests from the real estate community typically doesn't come with any cost to you, the tenant. It's already covered under the landlord's fee. Now, if that property is not listed with a broker, that's probably not the case, and you would expect to be paying that broker directly. And same goes with legal counsel. You're typically going to pay an attorney whatever their hourly rate is to negotiate that lease on your behalf.
Great, thank you, Ben. So wrapping up here, again, last call for any questions that come into the chat. But in the meantime, for each of you, we've talked about the options of telecommuting, of smaller spaces, of people being able to work from wherever. So what do you feel is special about York that makes it an attractive place to have a business?
Boy, that's a super load. I mean, gosh, we're all
Oh,
just
you could say any number of things.
how much time do we, yeah. And no, I really think what I've seen and experienced, I've been here in New York since 2004 or 5. Never have I seen a community that has such a great cross section of consumers. From a retail perspective, you can find someone who's looking for a bargain, and you can find somebody who's willing to spend whatever. And it's really interesting that we have a really strong mix of cross section of buyers and consumers from a retail standpoint. Similarly to our industry, New York is always kind of depression proof because we have so many different types of industry. We're not only based on car manufacturing or something. We have such a good cross section. And I think the same applies to retail and consumer goods, is that we've got a good cross section of customer base that we can attract a full gamut of customers.
Yeah, I agree with Blanda. I always say, people always ask me, well, what's I've never been to York. What is York? What's it about? I always say it's a melting pot, right? Because I've done a lot of different work in here in the city and around the surrounding areas, and it's all over the place, from museum work, to regular fit out, things like that, higher end office work, medical stuff, retail. It's all over the board, and I come from up north near Boiling Springs, so it's a lot different being down here. Just being in the city, working in the city. There's so many different opportunities to go out for lunch, to go shop. So that's why I always say it's a melting pot, right?
I think I would just add, York, especially downtown York, is also, it's a very collaborative community. I don't find it to be this hyper competitive, everyone's just looking out for themselves. There's a lot of collaboration and cooperation, and really kind of focusing on the big picture and trying to make the city in general better. And a lot of people that are sitting here today, and many others outside of this group, that are all working together behind the scenes and strategizing and trying to cut red tape and just make it an easier process to build out density and synergy amongst businesses and just help everyone be more successful. So I think it's for the most part a very welcoming environment where there are a lot of people that are willing to help out with no expectation for anything in return.
Thank you all for those perspectives. And we did have a few questions come in. There is one I want to make sure we share with the group, a question about reporting realtors or owners on gatekeeping and discrimination. Thank you, Ben, who answered this in the chat. You are able to file a complaint against a realtor to the PA Real Estate Commission. So a very important note there. I wanted to make sure was shared really with the group.
And also the York City, we have a Human Relations Commission as well, which investigates, when we have investigators and staff that will look into all of that stuff.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you both for that. A few other questions that have come in. One, would it be better to try and buy a commercial property rather than rent or lease? Should that be the ultimate goal? I'm sure there's a lot of factors, but generally.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. There's a simple kind of approach to looking at how much capital do you have, and is it better directed towards investing in owning the real estate, or is it, I'll use an example. If you buy a piece of real estate and you're going to occupy that yourself, you're still likely going to want to structure an ownership entity that then leases to your business entity. And, if you're putting financing on it, for example, the bank is going to make sure that you're paying yourself a market rent and that it's a typical kind of deal structure. And then you're going to have some metrics on what that rate of return to yourself as the real estate owner is from yourself as the occupant of the real estate via the lease vehicle. So like really simple approach is, if you have $100,000 to invest and you invest it in the real estate and you pay yourself rent, and you're going to generate an 8% return on that $100,000 with the real estate, but you could go invest that money in the growth of your business and making your business better, buying more equipment or expanding to multiple locations, and you're going to see a 25% return on that investment growing your business. You should probably lease and keep that capital preserved for the growth of your business. But if your return is lower than that on the real estate, then the real estate might be the better investment vehicle for you.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben.
Sure.
And we have one final question here from Scott in the Q&A, who's opening up a sandwich shop, asking, is it pretty standard to want to find and start renting a commercial real estate 2 to 3 months before opening a small restaurant to kind of get it painted, set it up? And then I wanted to ask want to use to ask for your business address on your credit application, and that takes a little bit of time too. So a couple of specific questions there, if anyone could answer those for Scott.
Yes, again, everything is negotiable. So I think to some extent, you got to look at the big picture, and a landlord's going to say, okay, well, you're asking me for 2 to 3 months of free rent, which means the landlord's going to carry the expenses of that space, and they might have a mortgage payment to pay. And so by not collecting rental income, it's costing them additional money out of pocket that they'd otherwise expect to have. It is typical though, but bigger picture, what else are you trying to negotiate with them? And if you're coming in and asking for free rent and you're trying to negotiate down the lease rate, and you're asking them to invest money in the space and make improvements for you, and you're asking for an early termination option or some other things, and it's a really short-term lease, well, they're not going to just cave on every single item that you try to negotiate. So I think you have to pick and choose what is most important to you as a tenant. And that's where you might find you need that startup time frame because you're not generating revenue with the space. And so maybe you compromise on something else you're trying to negotiate so you can get the 2 to 3 months.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and relates back also to financing for like space fit out. You could approach a landlord and say, hey, I need this space improved. Would you be willing to do it for me? And instead of paying you $200 a month, I'll pay you $220 a month moving forward. So some owners will, in fact, kind of finance your improvements to get you in there. So
the other part from the design side and the permitting side, where people sometimes get in trouble is they don't allow enough time for permitting and construction and even cost estimating. And these days, with the prices of materials moving around constantly, remember that it's typically 30 to 45 days for a permit review, but that doesn't start until it goes into the city. And they typically don't take that long. The city of York's been very fast at turning permits around, but if they get in a situation where they're very busy, it could take that amount of time. And that also that 30 to 45 doesn't account for the time it takes to get the drawings to that point. So you have architectural, you may have structural, you have mechanical, electrical, plumbing, potentially fire protection. So you have to give yourself that time frame, and that needed time varies depending on the size of the space, the complexity, and what type of use it is. And always allow yourself time for cost estimating as well, so you know what that true build out is at that point in time with the environment we have right now with materials and construction costs.
Excellent. Thank you all for this really robust discussion today. I'm sure there are some additional kind of follow-up questions. So our team is always here and can certainly help to connect you to any of the businesses or any of the resources that you need, and can certainly connect you to Ben and Blanda and Travis as it makes sense as well. And we stand here kind of ready to always help you. So a few last minute announcements that I'll make so I can keep us kind of right on time here. Our Downtown Inc. team will celebrate the Downtown First Awards on August 11th at People's Bank Park, which is a big celebration and for downtown York and all of the business owners, everybody who volunteers, who makes this community wonderful. So more information to come on that. For any of our downtown merchants that are on the call, we do have applications for Q3 First Friday grants that will close June 1st. So please take advantage of those so we can help support and promote your business as it relates to First Friday. There is a Bloom workshop for accounting. So if today was very beneficial and you're also thinking about accounting, getting some other things in line, on Saturday, May 21st, Mike Dowry with Corte and Associates will be hosting a Bloom workshop. All of that can be found on yceapa.org/Bloom. And one last kind of quick note too. The much anticipated 5-part paving series of George Street in New York City has begun. So we will continue to keep everybody informed with our partners at the city as to when that's happening and how traffic will kind of be directed and which parts are being paved when. Looking forward to getting all of that completed, and we'll keep relaying that information and working with our partners at the city as well. So we hope that you'll join us for the next Bloom Business Series sponsored by PNC. It will be on Wednesday, June 15th at 8:30 in the morning. We will be doing a social media 101 session led by our team, Hannah Beard and John Desmaris, who are two of our geniuses behind social media. We'll walk you through all kind of the nuances of getting your social media up to speed and how to make that most beneficial. So it is 9:30 on the dot. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to PNC. And we really appreciate such a robust discussion. Enjoy the rest of this beautiful day in downtown York.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.